Hi everyone, I'm Andy Asher. I'm editor of Bloomer Boomer. Basically, Bloomer Boomer is an online magazine, but I think it's a lot more than that, packed full of cool stuff for all of us over 50. And I say over 50, which is really nothing more than a measuring stick of life, but doesn't really mean anything else except, like everyone, we are getting older. And that's how our tagline, Good Life Movement plus 50, came to existence. Now the shows are live on Facebook, YouTube, some are recorded, and all are on the bloomerboomer.com website. Now you can catch our live shows 3 days a week, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday at 1 p.m. Central Time. The shows are part of a movement for new and evolving things that make for a good life plus 50. Part of the Bloomer Boomer project, the shows are about what works well and what's not, and how to make the best of it. And in the end, hopefully, something you can take away for yourself. Our guests are idea and thought leaders, experts, people with life experiences to emulate or can learn from, folks with a unique expertise, those that give us one of those aha moments or a revelation that can suddenly transform the complex and bewildering into something that's understandable. Now, the word bewildering just so happens to be the context of what we're talking about today. A couple of the most confusing and perplexing and paralyzing of emotions that we humans experience are the senses of fear and anxiety. They're an emotion that, in one sense, saves us from danger, but in our modern world, they are more often negatives that bring a halt to experiencing life. Today's guest has really explored the topic. He is the author of this book, The Fear and Anxiety Solution. His name is Friedemann Schaub, a physician. He's also a PhD in molecular biology. His book is about breakthrough process for healing and empowerment with your subconscious in mind. Hang in there for a minute, because we'll be right back. Friedemann Schaub, the fear and anxiety solution. You chose to jump into a huge issue of life, didn't you? There are very few things in life that can have a bigger influence on us than fear and anxiety, but unfortunately, they really do little than make us unhappy. Thanks a lot for tackling the issue.
Well, you're welcome, and it's not completely selfless because I was also dealing with fear and anxiety for a long time, so it was certainly also dear to my heart to get a little bit more information on how to not just ignore it or suppress it, but actually to overcome it and ideally grow from it.
Well, that is very kind of you to decide to share that with us. You know, we talked, or at least you recognize the fact that fear is not necessarily a bad thing, but in our life, as it's become so modern, it oftentimes revolves around things that we can't really do a lot about. And I think that's where the difficulty comes in just simply living with fear.
Well, you know, when it comes down to it, would you say that getting tired is a bad thing, being hungry is a bad thing, having thirst is a bad thing, feeling physical pain because you have a broken leg is a bad thing? No, it's a sensation that basically tells you something is not right, something is out of balance. Our natural instinct with anxiety and fear is to say, oh, something outside of us is not right, but we cannot do anything about it. So, my God, what are we going to do next? You know, it's almost like we feel not only trapped by the circumstances that scare us, but we also feel trapped by the emotions that make us feel so uncomfortable. And we are not really stopping and saying, well, is there anything that I can actually change inside of me to A, understand more, what is a fear actually trying to tell me, or what's the anxiety really coming from, and also what can I do to respond to that message? And that's where, this work with the subconscious is so effective, because I know from my own experience and working with thousands of people that it usually doesn't really make sense that we are scared, scared on the first date with a beautiful person, or scared when, we are walking down the hallway and the boss comes and frowns, and we are immediately making up a story on, oh, that means, we're going to get the pink slip or anything like that. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with reality. It doesn't make logical sense, but it's still there. And so we have to go to that non-logical part to our mind to better understand what it actually tries to convey.
And what is that unlogical mind? Is that the unreasonable fear? Is that what that is?
No, the part of our mind that is not necessarily caring about logic is the subconscious. And the subconscious is that deeper part that many people would say is like, when you think the mind is like an iceberg, the conscious mind is sticking out maybe like 10-15% of the entirety of the mind, and the subconscious is the rest, the 85% that have a lot of power. And the subconscious is working usually pretty much in the background all the time. It's what makes us have memories, because we cannot really consciously have all these memories always available, so they're stuck in the subconscious. The subconscious is very much connected to beliefs, to automatic behavior. I mean, often when I'm consciously somewhere else, I am brushing my teeth, and then afterwards I'm wondering who was actually brushing the teeth. But I certainly didn't pay attention, but it just happened. It's like that what the subconscious does. People say maybe up to 80% of our daily activities are controlled by the subconscious mind. And one thing that it also controls are our emotions. So that part of the mind cares much more about feeling and about patterns and beliefs than it cares about, logic and rational thinking. And that's why it's very effective to go there and work with it.
Work with it. Well, that sounds like a real key point. It's not something, it just happens. You've got to work with it. I'd like you to expand upon that. And also, the fear and anxiety starts coming into our life, whether we have children and we're worried about them, whether we're awaiting some lab results from your doctor, or something that, like you mentioned, getting a pink slip at your job. How do you put those aside?
Now, there is the fear that you would say is completely reasonable. I mean, if your child is, I don't know, on a road trip in Afghanistan, of course you worry about the child. And I don't think that is necessarily the fear and anxiety that will capture you day by day, for years. It's a contextual fear. Same thing if you're waiting for a lab result. It takes maybe a week, and then the fear usually disappears. The more problematic fear or anxiety is that what is all the time there. So as soon as you have one anxiety gone, the next one comes in. It's almost like, either it feels like, well, I'm not really safe, or the world is kind of against me, or I'm feeling like, not good enough. I mean, that is the fear that people really suffer from. The fear that, let's say, for example, you go and have a checkup with a doctor, and the doctor looks at you and say, oh, we have to look a little bit more closely. Well, of course you have a little concern about that. And I wouldn't say that this is something that necessarily needs to be treated. Of course, ideally, you want to feel so confident that you feel, yes, no matter what, I know I will find a solution. I know we'll deal with it. But that's, I think, often too much asked, especially if it's kind of a fear that almost appears reasonable, because it's about life and death. But
Absolutely.
I'm talking more about the unreasonable fear. And I think people that are suffering from fear, that are looking for help, they understand the unreasonable fear where you always wait for the shoe dropping. You always feel you have to look over your shoulders. You always feel somehow judged, exposed, criticized. That is a fear we really need to work on, because that's a fear that keeps you trapped and really takes away your joy.
Does. Now you let on already that the reason, or partly the reason why you wrote your book was because you felt that yourself. So tell us how you've addressed that for you.
Well, I didn't. I was really stuck in it for years. I mean, it started basically with, me going to high school and realizing that, oh, life all of a sudden appears so serious. I didn't really understand before that there were expectations on having good grades, and all of a sudden there were. And, this kind of pressure I felt from my parents was a surprise to me. I saw myself first, in the first few years of my life, more like, oh yeah, life is good, happy-go-lucky. And then all of a sudden it was almost like a little bit of conditional acceptance. And I never resolved that until I started to really look inside, which was, in my late 20s. But until then, I basically thought, in order to not feel fear, I have to achieve. There is one pattern that we try to compensate fear or anxiety for, which is the achiever pattern. And that basically means you feel like, okay, straight A's, that's going to make me feel better. Or having, whatever, a doctorate, that's going to make me feel better. Or having, your boss pat you in the back and say, okay, good work, that makes you feel better. That achieving pattern, we're talking about, 50 and older. That works for a lot of people, especially when they are driven to excel for the next promotion, for that next thing that they can really identify themselves with. But then when they retire, when they change, their life, that's when that achiever pattern all of a sudden doesn't work anymore, because they don't achieve anything anymore that they really feel good about. And that's when often people feel back into the panic, back into the fear. And that's something that, again, is basically just a mechanism that I use to postpone the solution, or a mechanism to manage my emotions, but I didn't really heal them. In other ways, people manage their anxiety is by avoiding. So they don't want to necessarily deal with anything, that challenges them or potentially could lead to failure or rejection. So they just hide out. Others are the pleasers. That's also, again, especially for mothers or parents that feel like, okay, I'm pleasing everyone, especially the kids. And once they're out of the house, well, who do you please now? Then you all of a sudden fall back into anxiety, which can often lead to depression. And then there is also the controller. The controller is a person who compensates for feeling anxious and powerless by micromanaging and by being always in charge and having to always, sometimes also through maybe aggression or anger, to feel empowered. But deep inside, there is a lot of fear that really makes that person do what that person is doing. So this is really also something that maybe your viewers can relate to, that they look at the pattern that may not really appear like, oh, I'm dealing with anxiety, because they may feel like, oh, no, I'm not. I'm just really driven, or I'm just really someone who is, in the need to know every little detail in life. But when they look a little bit deeper, they can already see, no, actually what's underneath all of that, there's actually a deep insecurity or a deep fear and a deep sense of powerlessness.
Well, I guess that there are healthier ways to deal with fear and anxiety than others, even though we all face it in one way or another. And how do you address fear and anxiety that might be different than others?
Well, I am, first of all, curious to understand where the pattern, I talked just about those 4 patterns. How is the pattern, how we do anxiety, how did it even come to existence? Where did it start? And that's where that pain analogy is so helpful. If you're seeing anxiety more as a symptom, and not necessarily as the cause or the problem, then you can go and say, okay, so if this is like pain, this emotional pain of anxiety, well, what's the wound? What's really, where does this actually stem from? In my case, it was that deep belief of not being good enough or being only acceptable if I am performing well or achieving. Other people realize that, this where it really came from was maybe from a time where, they felt like that they are not safe, that they just feel, well, I had a very chaotic childhood, or my parents were really always, fighting or anything like that. And so they had to find a way to go through life by hiding out, by basically making them feel invisible. And so, going back in time and having a little inventory, especially when we are 50 and older, is really helpful. We lived quite a bit of life already. And so it is important to look back and not say, oh, looking back at life is like going backwards. No, there is a library of information, and there may be some bits and pieces that are still not quite working together, and those bits and pieces need to be addressed, and we can learn from them. Sometimes we can resolve them, and then we can also see, like, this is what I see with my clients all the time. This is where the fear and anxiety goes away, when we are actually in a place where we're saying, oh, that wound, that confusion, or that belief that I have been carrying around with me for all those years, finally it's actually disappearing or replaced or released, and that is also what makes the symptom, the anxiety, disappear and release.
Well, I don't want to let you get away with without asking you about Alex Honnold.
Right.
He overcame what is my greatest fear, practically, is heights. But the greatest fear imaginable to me, and his was climbing the sheer face of El Capitan in Yosemite with only his hands and his feet to hold him from falling. If there's anybody that is an example of dealing with fear, it would be him.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's say, for example, back to the subconscious mind, there is a part of us that has a job to protect us. What he is doing is not safe. What he is doing is putting his life on the line, and a part of the mind knows that. And so the part of the mind which says, if you fall, you're going to be dead, that part of the mind creates fear. By the way, the fear of falling is one of the few fears that are, almost like genetically preserved. That's one of the core fears. So no wonder that you also have that fear, because most people do have that. There is that, just a realization gravity can kill you. And so that person decides, for his ambitions and for his passion or for whatever reason, to say, I'm going to put my life on the line and I'm going to make this happen. He needs to deal with that fear. And I think he said to put the fear on the shelf and just focus on, what he's doing in the moment. And that advice is certainly helpful. Now, the problem is that I've seen often that people are putting their fears on the side, or they're saying, you just have to face your fears, stare them down, ignore them, whatever it is. Well, it can actually backfire, because it can make you then the next time even more afraid. Case in point, I had a client who was afraid of jumping out of an airplane with a parachute. He won this in an auction, thought, oh, that's going to be fun. He was never shy from any challenges, so he did it. He completely had a panic attack. It was a horrible experience, and he hated that he had anxiety, so he signed up for 35 more jumps, bought them on the spot, went faithfully every weekend to do at least 2 jumps, and at the end of the 35, he was pretty much in a constant panic. This whole idea of, oh, I'm going to overcome my anxiety by challenging myself even more, simply backfired, because somehow a part of his mind said, you are out of your mind and you cannot be trusted, so I'm going to make you feel so miserable that you will not leave the house, because if you leave the house, you're going to go back in the plane and jump again. So, we have to also see Well, there is a reason why evolution has happened and why we have survived for hundreds of thousands of years, because part of it was also that a fear and anxiety told us, don't do those things. Don't, ride a saber-toothed tiger. Don't play with snakes. Don't jump off mountains. That's something very natural. So what he was doing is remarkable, but it's not necessarily, if you are fearful of height, the solution to challenge yourself like this over and over again.
I'm so glad you told that story, and I was afraid what the upshot of it was that he had cured himself, and I'd be kind of disappointed because it just wouldn't work that way, and lo and behold, that's what happened. Friedemann Schaub, thank you so much. I've got your book, The Fear and Anxiety Solution. Anything else, and where people can find out more about it?
Yeah, just visit the website, thefearandanxietysolution.com. It's thefearandanxietysolution.com. I'm working with clients individually in one-on-one sessions via Skype or Zoom or the phone, so no matter where you are, you can set up a free consultation, and we can talk about how the work I'm offering can help you to outgrow fear and anxiety. And one thing I want to just mention is that for me personally, when I was understanding my anxiety more, it actually didn't make me just not have anxiety. It made me actually a more confident person because I learned more about myself. And that's, the goal for my work too. And that's what you can find in the book. Let fear and anxiety be more a catalyst for you to be more empowered, to find more out about what's inside of you, than the obstacle that just holds you back and you have to push it aside. It is really something that can make you so much more aware of what you need, of who you are, of your gifts and talents. So it's not something to avoid. It's something to actually address.
Well, that's really a fantastic lesson. Again, Friedemann Schaub, the author of The Fear and Anxiety Solution. We'll be right back. Well, again, thanks so much for joining us. We're going to have these, like I say, every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. Most shows do include a book section that focuses on the best book titles that come into our Bloomer Boomer hideaway here. In many cases, we'll be interviewing some of the authors, just like Friedemann Schaub. All the books speak to the Bloomer Boomer community for better living. And also, be sure, if you can, join us on Facebook and like us there. And also you can visit our website, bloomerboomer.com. We hope you liked the show, learned a thing or two. A full show will be available on YouTube and at the Bloomer Boomer website. The audio version will be available on Apple Podcasts, iTunes. And we have other shows coming up with some amazing guests. So please, like I say, like us on Facebook and visit us at bloomerboomer.com. So long.